Hi, I'm Romilly. And 3 hours before my niece's big dance, my daughter-in-law ripped her dress on purpose. She said it was an accident, smiled, shrugged, pretended her nails got caught. But it wasn't just the dress she tried to tear apart. It was my granddaughter's confidence in my place in this family. The worst part? This wasn't the first time. They'd been slowly pushing me out for years, excluding me from group chats, claiming credit for my work, making sure I was present, but invisible. And when I finally decided to fight back, what would you have done? Stayed silent or stitched your way to the truth? I parked half a block away from the Pasadena Community Arts Center. The sidewalks were already dotted with parents tugging garment bags, their children skipping beside them. I held a printed email in one hand and clutched my handmade scarf with the other, a soft lavender wool I'd knit for moments like this. It still held the faint scent of cedar from my hallway closet. The morning sun fell gently on the building's wide steps, but something inside me stayed cool, uncertain. I adjusted my scarf and walked forward, the invitation rustling slightly in my grip. The kind of rustle that told you it had been read many times. I reached the door with a cautious kind of hope, the kind that builds up after too many times being left out and still showing up anyway. The front table had 2 women in blue lanyards. One of them smiled politely as I approached, scanning her clipboard before I even handed over my printout. "Name?" she asked. "Romilly Thorne, Kama's grandmother," I replied, offering the paper. Her smile faltered. "I'm sorry. I don't see you listed here. Are you sure you were invited to this rehearsal?" My hands didn't shake. "Not yet. I have the confirmation email right here." She scanned it. "It might be a mistake. Could you step aside for a moment while we check?" I turned just in time to see Zinnia, my daughter-in-law, glide past. She was in high heels and a blazer, all polished presence. She didn't even blink when she saw me, just turned her head slightly and whispered something to another mom. They laughed quietly. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mix-up. I stepped back, nodding slowly. Not at the volunteer, but at myself, for daring to believe I had a seat at this table again. The lobby felt crowded, but the distance between me and everyone else stretched wider than any room had a right to. 200 characters. Outside, the air was warmer. I found a shaded bench in the center's small garden and sat, letting the email slip from my hand to my lap. Parents walked by, chatting and laughing, their presence seamless in this space. I used to be one of them. I watched a group of moms taking selfies with their daughters. One of them offered her scarf to shield her child's costume from the wind. I pulled mine tighter, not out of cold, but something else. It reminded me of my 58th birthday. I'd organized a dinner, bought candles, polished the good wine glasses. Zinnia never showed. Lucan texted 2 hours late with a vague excuse. Kama was too tired. Back then, I told myself not to take it personally. But this wasn't silence. It was strategy. I felt the edges of my scarf and focused on the threads. Each one had a purpose, had been chosen. It reminded me that I, too, had been chosen once. Now, I was something they edited out of the family photo, without cropping. 900 characters. My phone buzzed. I reached for it instinctively, hoping it was Lucan. Nothing. Just a calendar reminder. I opened the parents' group chat to see if there were any updates. The app didn't recognize the group. It was gone. I checked again, fingers moving slower now. Maybe I'd archived it by mistake, but it wasn't there. I opened my messages and typed, "Hey, Lucan, they said I'm not on the list for today. Was there a change?" I waited. No response. The silence wasn't just empty. It was thick, like cement settling over a buried story. I slumped deeper into the bench. The voices around me grew louder. I wasn't just missing from today. I'd been missing for a while now, and no one had noticed. 1,000 characters. A familiar voice startled me. Romilly? Moira. She stood at the gate, a tote bag over one shoulder, and that same fiery look she always wore when something didn't sit right. I figured something was off, she said, approaching. You hadn't commented on anything this week. I forced a smile. I wasn't in the chat. Her eyes narrowed. Zinnia posted a picture this morning. Said she was managing everything solo, proud to give Kama all the support she needs. I felt something shift in my chest. Not a break, a tightening. She's rewriting my place in my granddaughter's life, I whispered. Moira sat down beside me, and doing it with hashtags. We sat in silence for a beat. The wind tugged gently at the scarf on my neck. I'm done pretending this is all a misunderstanding, I said. Moira looked at me, surprised, not by the words, but the weight behind them. Let's meet tomorrow, she said. Time to stop letting them set the stage. I nodded, quiet, firm, 2,400 characters. And as I watched Moira walk away, I realized something chilling. I was being erased, one thread at a time. I stayed behind the heavy velvet curtain longer than I meant to. From where I stood, I had a clear view of Kama under the spotlight. The dress I made, ivory satin, with hand-stitched vines climbing the bodice, glowed under the stage lights. It fit her perfectly, every seam lying flat, every hem flowing with her breath. She looked taller, older, like the girl I'd sewn that dress for was finally growing into the world. Zinnia stood beside her, one hand on Kama's shoulder, the other gesturing like she'd been the one who sewed the final stitch. She leaned in and whispered something to the cluster of moms standing nearby. They laughed, eyes flicking back toward the girl and the dress. I knew that kind of laugh. It had teeth. Kama spun once, beaming, and Zinnia clapped gently, just enough to draw attention. I stayed in the shadows, holding the edge of the curtain in my hand, fingers pressing the fabric as though it might hold me together better than I could on my own. 1,200 characters. The rehearsal director stepped forward, clearing her throat. And a big round of applause for the costume work by Zinnia Carmichael, our multitasking supermom. Applause erupted, loud, cheerful, relentless. I didn't blink. My jaw locked as I stood there frozen. The fabric in my hand felt tighter now, tighter than it should have. A few heads turned toward me. I caught one or two glances, soft, confused. But no one said anything, not even Moira. Zinnia smiled as if she hadn't heard the announcement, as if she were too modest to claim credit she had just stolen, in whispers. The applause softened, the lights dimmed. Kama ran off stage for her next cue, and I stood alone, wrapped in silence that sounded far too familiar. 1,000 characters. I left before the stage emptied. There was no use staying. I passed through the back hallway and slipped into the small garden outside, letting the door fall shut behind me without a sound. I sat on a low stone wall, staring at the sun as it filtered through the lattice of overhead vines. My hand sat in my lap, still curled slightly. Years ago, I taught a sewing class at a local community college. My students, mothers, grandmothers, teenagers, used to beam when they held up a project. The pride in their eyes was mine, too. I mattered in those rooms. I was a thread that held things together. But today, I felt unraveled, like a patch left behind after the garment had been finished, like a name unstitched from its own work. 900 characters. My phone buzzed. A message from Moira, just a photo. Zinnia's newest post on social media, a picture of her standing beside Kama, her hand gently resting on the shoulder I used to hold every weekend. The caption read, "When you're the only one holding it all together, even stitches feel heavy." There were already 47 likes, 7 comments. "Supermom, you do it all. Kama's lucky to have you." I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I didn't even breathe too hard. I just pressed my finger to the screen, held it for a moment, and hit save. I wasn't collecting evidence out of spite. I was collecting truth before it was buried beneath curated lies. 1,000 characters. When I got home, I placed my scarf gently over the back of my chair. The sewing machine sat quiet, untouched, since the night I finished Kama's dress. I reached for the storage box I kept beneath the table. Old project receipts, sketches, printed emails. I hadn't meant to use it, but it was there. I placed a screenshot next to a copy of the original email from the rehearsal invite. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop, untitled Personal. I began dragging in saved screenshots, date-stamped and labeled. Photos, posts, messages from Lucan, Zinnia's tag history. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even justice. It was preservation. A silent record, just in case I was ever asked why I stopped staying silent. And just before I shut my laptop, I saw the first thread unravel. A memory that still stung after all these years. The fabric room always smelled like starch and old ambition. I'd spent hours in spaces like this during my teaching years. Rows of eager hands tugging at thread, trying to tame cloth into something beautiful. But today, I wasn't here to teach. I was here to double-check a hemline and drop off an extra box of safety pins. Something to keep my hands busy while I stayed invisible. The sewing notes I kept for Kama's costume sat open on the table. I'd mapped out her arm length, shoulder line, every soft curve of movement. I knew that dress like I knew my own pulse. I reached into a drawer, searching for fabric glue, when a voice slipped through the cracked office door behind me. "If it rips, she'll panic. My girl's ready to step in. It's not like the judges will notice." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Zinnia's voice, light, casual, floated from the other side. She was laughing, like it was just another line in a perfectly rehearsed play. And she's already nervous. If it tears, we just pivot. No big deal. My daughter gets the moment. And I'm not cleaning up that emotional mess again. Not after last year. I took one step closer to the door. Not enough to cast a shadow. Just enough to hear clearly. There was a pause. Then she added, "Romilly thinks she's helping, but really she's just in the way. The sooner Kama learns to lean on me, the better." My chest tightened, but I stayed still. My hands, though, curled into fists at my sides. She knew I was backstage today. She said those words anyway. She didn't fear being caught because she didn't believe I mattered. This wasn't miscommunication. This wasn't friction. This was precision. I walked away before she could open the door and see me standing there, drenched in the sound of her betrayal. 1,400 characters. The walk home blurred into one long, dragging pulse. The sidewalk, the street signs, even the crack in the curb where I once helped Kama pick flowers. Everything became background noise. And then came the memory. Last spring, Kama had been preparing for her school recital. She'd worked on that dance piece for weeks. The morning of the show, someone dropped off a small box of snacks labeled "From the Moms." Kama took one bite, and within the hour, she was sick. Not hospital level, but sick enough to stay home. I'd cleaned her face, rubbed her back, told her it wasn't her fault. The doctor mentioned cross-contamination, but I'd always wondered. That box had Zinnia's handwriting on the tag. I recognized the little hearts she dotted her eyes with. I hadn't said anything then. I hadn't wanted to believe she'd risk a child's performance, even her own daughter's, for attention. Now, I wasn't wondering anymore. I was remembering through a clear lens. Buencho Sendo, 100 characters. Back home, I reached for the leather-bound journal I kept in the second drawer of my bedroom desk. I turned to a fresh page, wrote the date, the time, and the words I'd heard. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth, as it was, had weight. Then I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood still for a moment. I thought of all the ways I could explode, slam doors, send texts, make calls. But I didn't. Instead, I returned to the desk, drew a small red circle on the margin of the page, and underlined one word: sabotage. That was what it was. Not exclusion, not oversight, not family tension. Sabotage. From this point on, every thread I pulled would be with that knowledge in mind. 1,000 characters. I dialed Moira. She picked up on the second ring. I heard something, I said. She's not just trying to replace me. She's trying to ruin Kama's moment. There was no hesitation in her voice. Do you want me to bring the camcorder? Yes, I replied, just in case. I don't know what she's planning, but I'm not waiting to find out the hard way. Moira sighed. You always gave people more chances than they deserved. I'm glad you're done with that. I stared at the journal still open on my desk. This isn't just about me anymore, I said. She's targeting a child now. And that, Moira answered, is when we stop asking for understanding and start preparing for battle. We agreed to meet before the dress rehearsal. Quiet, focused, ready. And if she was bold enough to sabotage a child's future once, I had to assume she'd try again. This time, louder, faster, crueler. Saturday arrived with a brightness that didn't match the heaviness I carried into the auditorium. Kama and I arrived early, as planned, with her costume bag slung over my shoulder and a small makeup kit tucked under my arm. She clung to her thermos, nerves already taking up more room than her voice. Backstage smelled like sweat and floor wax. Kids were buzzing in and out of dressing rooms, all excitement and glitter. I helped Kama into her dress, soft blue satin I had reinforced carefully after what I overheard the day before. I ran my fingers along the side seam, checking the spot twice. I had double-stitched the line. I just want to dance like me, Kama whispered as I adjusted the bodice. Not like Mom wants me to. I looked at her reflection in the mirror. She looked nothing like the child Zinnia tried to mold for pictures. Kama looked real. Her. I kissed her cheek and said, then dance like no one's watching but your own soul. 1,000 characters. The call sheet was tacked to the wall, and Kama was listed 9th, second half of the show. That gave her time to stretch, to ground herself. But not even 10 minutes after we settled in, a stagehand called out, Kama Carmichael, you're up next. My eyes darted to the clipboard. That's not what it says, I told him. He gave an apologetic shrug. Last minute reshuffle. Came from your mom. Said it'd be better for her schedule. I turned my head. Zinnia stood near the entrance, arms crossed, watching from a distance. When she caught my glare, she gave a slight shrug, an innocent little flick, as if to say, "What can you do?" Kama looked up at me, wide-eyed. "I haven't even warmed up." I took her hands. "You've done this 100 times. Go slow. Go deep. You know your rhythm." She nodded, but her mouth stayed tight. 1,100 characters. She stepped onto the stage. Her number was soft, elegant, meant to showcase control and grace, not speed. The music started. I stood in the wings, breath shallow, arms folded. Kama moved as if each note lived inside her muscles. The dress flowed beautifully. The blue shimmer caught the overheads just right. Then halfway through her pirouette, I heard it, a soft pop. The side seam gave way. The fabric split down the right side of her dress, like paper tearing under pressure. A collective gasp went up from the audience. Kama froze, mid-turn, before bolting off the stage. She collided into the curtain, her arms wrapped around herself as she ran past me, face crumpled. Before I could follow, Zinnia swooped in. "Oh no!" she called out dramatically. "My nails must have snagged it backstage earlier. I didn't even notice." She said it loud enough for the stagehand, the kids, the moms nearby, all of them to hear. They nodded. Some even comforted her. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I memorized every word she'd just spun into the air. 1,400 characters. Back in the dressing room, Zinnia fussed around Kama like she hadn't broken her down in front of a crowd. Other moms peeked in, tossing looks of sympathy at Zinnia. "She works so hard," one whispered. "Poor thing, everything falls on her." I stood against the wall. My mouth stayed shut. I knew if I opened it, it wouldn't be calm. Kama sat quietly, her shoulders hunched forward. Zinnia offered her a granola bar, dabbing at her face with a tissue like she was preparing for another photo. I knew what I was watching. This wasn't comfort. This was performance. Zinnia wasn't helping Kama. She was redirecting the spotlight, turning shame into applause, just not for the child who'd earned it. And no one thought to ask me anything, not about the stitching, not about the timing, not about what Kama needed next. 900 characters. We left early. The air outside was cooler than it had been that morning. I walked beside Kama, who hadn't said a word since we left the dressing room. She clutched her bag like it held her dignity. Once inside the car, buckled in, she turned her head slightly. "Do you think they'll let me try again tomorrow?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her, the tiny line between her brows, the way she kept her hands folded so tightly in her lap. "You'll get your moment," I said finally, one way or another. When we got home, she went to her room without a sound. I walked into the sewing room, flicked on the lamp, and pulled out the sketchbook. Then the fabric. Then the extra roll of thread. If they wanted to tear dreams, I would teach them what it meant to build them back stronger. Because if my granddaughter's dreams were fragile threads, I was about to reinforce them with steel. The drive home stretched longer than the road itself. Neither of us spoke. Kama stared out the window, her costume bag clutched tightly in her lap, like it held her dignity. The tear in the fabric still gaped open at the seam, but she didn't touch it. I gripped the steering wheel tighter each time we stopped at a light. The silence between us wasn't angry or sad. It was exhausted. Grief without theatrics. When we pulled into the driveway, she unbuckled slowly. No tears, no questions. She walked straight inside, left her shoes by the door, and disappeared into her room. I didn't follow her. Instead, I walked down the hall and opened the door to my sewing room. a space that had always felt more sacred than sentimental. I flicked on the light and stood for a moment, letting the stillness wrap around me. Then I turned toward the tall cabinet in the far corner, the one I hadn't opened in months. 1,000 characters. I hadn't planned to touch that garment bag again. It was a just-in-case project, a midnight indulgence born out of instinct and quiet dread. But as I pulled open the door and unzipped the bag, there it was, midnight blue, soft as smoke, stitched with care that spanned long nights and long-buried hope. I laid the dress gently across the table. The light caught the shimmer of the tiny crystals I'd sewn along the hem. She hadn't even seen it yet. I'd kept it hidden, unsure if I'd ever need it. But now, it looked back at me like a dare. I stepped into motion before I let myself hesitate. I pulled out my tools, needles, thread, pins, everything in its place. Kama needed more than words. She needed to feel ready again. I wasn't just going to fix what had been broken. I was going to offer her something new, something no one could steal credit for. 1,200 characters. The needle moved steadily through the fabric, rhythm smoothing my breath with each pass. My phone buzzed next to the machine. I glanced at it without breaking pace. A notification, social media. Curiosity got the better of me. I paused, wiped my hands, and opened the app. Someone I used to have coffee with, Carrie, from the PTA days, had posted a picture with Zinnia. "Surround yourself with the strong ones," the caption read. No tags, but I recognized the location. I recognized the message. Below it, comments rolled in. "Zinnia's amazing. You two are such powerhouses. What an inspiration." I stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then I locked my phone, set it down, and went back to my work. If people had chosen their version of the story, that was fine. I wasn't interested in explaining myself anymore. I had a dress to finish. 1,000 characters. I threaded the next needle. Tighter stitches now. Stronger reinforcement along the side. The pattern I follow is c'est un enfant, first from a magazine. It was memory-based. I thought back to when Kama was 5, twirling in my kitchen in a tutu I'd made from scraps and old curtain lining. Her laughter had echoed through the tile floors like wind chimes. That same joy had flickered in her eyes again during our last fitting, before it was taken from her in front of everyone. But I remembered it, that joy, and it wasn't gone. The dress began to take shape again under my hands, not a replica of what was lost, but something entirely different, bolder, freer. I moved on to the bodice, then the waist, then the shoulders, methodical, focused. This wasn't just sewing. This was defiance, delivered in sequins and thread. 2,100 characters. Hours passed. The light in the room had shifted to a warmer glow, shadows crawling into corners. As I finished the final row of beads, I stepped back to examine the whole piece. The dress wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It shimmered under the lamp, catching the light just right. Armor, I thought. I picked up a small scrap of satin from the floor and ran it between my fingers before whispering, "She doesn't get to win. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not while I'm still here." I placed the dress on the mannequin and smoothed the fabric over the bust. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Kama turn over in bed. She didn't know yet what I had ready for her. She didn't need to, not yet. And as I laid the dress across the mannequin, I felt something rise in me. Not revenge, not rage, but readiness. I stepped into my sewing room just after dawn. The dress hung on the mannequin like it was already waiting for its cue. Kama was still asleep, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't wake her until the last bead was secured. I walked to my desk drawer to tuck a final note into the garment bag. Something light, something affirming. But as I reached for my journal, I stopped cold. The leather-bound cover was bent, edges frayed like it had been forced open. I flipped it open, pages torn, yanked, scattered. My notes, quotes, timelines, everything I'd been collecting for weeks, shredded and tossed like trash. I didn't need fingerprints. Only one person had access to this room without knocking. I placed the journal down without a sound. My fingers grazed a scrap of fabric left from Kama's old dance wrap. If Zinnia had taken a blade to my memory, then I would sharpen mine in return. 1,200 characters. By the time I got to the center, the buzz of prep filled the air. I moved through it like I had something important to deliver, because I did. The midnight blue dress was wrapped in a protective cover, draped carefully over my forearm. I carried it like it was more than silk and thread, because it was. As I passed the stage tech booth, 2 lighting assistants whispered near the monitor. Just Kama's spot. Glitched again? Yep, same sequence. No issue with anyone else's. I stopped at the edge. What's going on? One of them looked up. Lighting board freaked, only during Kama's cue. System reset now, but weird, right? Zinnia appeared behind me, sipping from a thermal mug. Maybe it's fate, she said with a smile too smooth to be real. I watched her walk away without a word. She wasn't covering her tracks anymore. She was daring me to follow them. 1,000 characters. Backstage, I found the dressing nook Moira and I had picked out yesterday, far from traffic, quiet, safe. I unzipped the bag and let the fabric breathe. The crystals twinkled under fluorescent light, like they'd been waiting to be seen. I sent a quick text to Moira. Backup video setup needed today. Her reply came in seconds. Already wired near stage left. Don't blink. I smiled, not because I was glad, because I was ready. I wasn't hoping Zinnia would behave. I was prepared for the moment she didn't. I pressed the dress flat with my hands, smoothing every fold like it held the edge of something sacred. Let them try again. Let them underestimate us one more time. 1,000 characters. Kama stepped into the room with bare feet and a face that carried both nerves and determination. She paused when she saw the dress. It's for you, I said. She ran her hand along the neckline, eyes wide. Is it really okay for me to wear this? I nodded. It's not just a dress. It's armor, and it's yours. She tried it on without hesitation. The bodice hugged her frame perfectly. The skirt flowed like it was made of breath and courage. I adjusted the back clasp while she looked into the mirror. No sequins on the sleeves? She asked. Didn't want to outshine your movement. She smiled, soft but honest, not a stage smile. Hers. This time she didn't cry. She stood tall, strong, ready, and so was I. 1,200 characters. As I walked down the hall toward the main stage, the buzz of final prep building around me, Zinnia came around the corner. She didn't flinch when she saw me. She didn't even stop, but I did. I stepped directly into her path. She raised an eyebrow, that practiced smirk barely twitching. I don't fight with nails and whispers, I said. She tilted her head, amused. What do you fight with then? I looked her square in the eye. Precision and memory. Zinnia stepped back. You're overthinking this, Romilly. Maybe, I said, but if you try one more time, I promise you'll see what happens when a quiet woman fights back. I turned and walked toward the wings. Behind me, she didn't follow, because this time I wouldn't let her set the stage. I'd be standing right in the wings, watching her curtain fall. The auditorium buzzed with pre-show energy as I stood just off stage, my hand resting on the flash drive in my coat pocket. It was light, barely noticeable in weight, but heavier than any threat Zinnia had ever hurled. Kama stood in the wings, dressed in midnight blue, hair pulled back tight, eyes locked on the stage like it owed her something. She didn't ask questions this time. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just squeezed my hand once before walking toward the curtain. Across the room, Zinnia fluttered like a stagehand who didn't belong to any production. She passed out granola bars, adjusted collars, smiled for photos. I watched her like a hawk watches wind shifts. She didn't notice me watching, or maybe she didn't care anymore. But I did. And today, I was done just watching. 100 characters. Kama's name was called, and the lights lifted slowly, just like we'd rehearsed. This time, no one switched her slot. No one touched her dress. No one sabotaged the rigging or the cues. She moved like music, fluid and precise. The blue fabric shimmered with each turn, catching the overheads and throwing them back like stars. I watched the crowd lean in, heads tilted, phones held high. No one blinked. The final step came. She held it, breath steady, and the music fell away. The crowd erupted. Real applause. Earned, not manufactured. Zinnia clapped louder than anyone, eyes wide, as if she'd been rooting for this outcome all along. She looked sideways at me, trying to read what was coming. She wouldn't have to wait long. 1,000 characters. The MC walked to the microphone, smiled professional, but just tight enough to signal something had shifted. Before our intermission, we have a quick moment to clarify a concern brought to our attention. People stirred. I kept my eyes on Zinnia. We believe in transparency here, she continued. So we'd like to share a brief clip to provide clarity and protect the integrity of this space. The screen above the stage flickered to life. There, in crisp audio and video, thanks to Moira's placement and timing, Zinnia's voice filled the auditorium. If it rips, she'll panic. My girl's ready to step in. It's not like the judges will notice. Gasps rippled through the seats. Someone in the front row muttered, "That's her." The video ended. Silence fell harder than any spotlight. Zinnia stood frozen, arms half raised, face pale. For once, her hands weren't gesturing. They trembled. When 200 characters, I stepped forward, not rushing, not triumphing, just claiming my space. Zinnia looked at me, mouth parted, but no words followed. I didn't need a mic. I didn't need applause. "No need to shout," I said calmly. "The truth's already louder." Somewhere in the back, someone clapped once. Then again. It grew slowly, hesitant at first, then steady. Parents began shifting. Whispers swelled. Zinnia turned in circles, looking for a friendly face. But the same people who'd once echoed her hashtags now looked away. She opened her mouth again. Nothing came. Kama stood at the edge of the curtain, watching, her eyes wide but not afraid. I nodded toward her. "She earned today. You tried to steal it, and the worst part is you didn't even think she'd notice." Zinnia took one step back, then another. 1,000 characters. Moira joined me just off stage, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. I didn't need to say anything. Her presence said enough. Lucan had remained seated stunned, but as the applause returned to Kama, now walking center stage to accept the roses handed from the front row. He slowly stood, and then he clapped. One beat, then another. No words from him, just hands. Finally, moving in my direction. Kama turned toward me. Her steps were light, but purposeful. She walked off stage and threw her arms around me with the kind of quiet strength she hadn't had a week ago. "I knew you'd fix it," she whispered into my scarf. "I didn't fix anything," I said. "You made it through. That was all you." Moira squeezed my shoulder again. Because when truth takes center stage, no spotlight can outshine it. After the clip played and Zinnia slipped out of the spotlight like smoke through a crack, the auditorium stayed buzzing. But I didn't. I moved through it like a ghost with purpose, bypassing the murmurs, the stares, the low laughter now aimed at her. My focus wasn't on retrobus. It was on a zipper, a stitch, and a little girl who deserved better than whispers. I retrieved the garment bag we'd prepared, its shape familiar against my shoulder. The final showcase segment was about to begin, and Kama was nowhere near ready, at least not by their timeline. But I knew her rhythm. I knew the way her shoulders set when she was determined. I entered the green room quietly. Kama sat near the window, lacing her dance shoes, brows furrowed in silence. She didn't look up. I knelt beside her and unzipped the bag. She turned, eyes flicking to the navy shimmer inside. I said nothing. 1,100 characters. She reached into the bag, fingers brushing the fabric. Then she saw it. A folded piece of paper pinned just beneath the neckline. She read it without needing to ask. "You don't need light to shine. You are the light." Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she folded the note back into the lining and hugged me so tight I thought I'd break. "Thank you for believing I still could," she whispered. "I always did," I said softly, "even when you didn't." She stood up, slipped on the dress, and adjusted the bodice with her usual grace. There was something in her walk now, not performance, not polish, just presence. She didn't wait for someone to escort her to the stage. She walked out on her own. 100 characters, no announcement, no dramatic re-entry, just a single spotlight as Kama walked into it, her body framed in that midnight blue, fluid, sure, hers. The music began, soft and pulsing like a heartbeat. She moved slowly at first, letting the notes stretch across her limbs. Her arms rose, not in precision, but emotion. Her footfalls matched the swell of the sound, deliberate and raw. People leaned forward in their seats. There was no clapping, mid-performance, no camera flashes, just breath held in collective stillness. She wasn't dancing for medals or praise. She was dancing to reclaim space, and I stood backstage, hand to my chest, watching her become exactly who she was always meant to be. 1,200 characters. At the end, when the music faded and her body came to rest, the audience stayed frozen for a moment, then erupted. The host stepped forward, beaming. "And what a beautiful conclusion to today's showcase," she said. Then she turned toward me. "Were you the one who made the dress?" I stepped into view, looked directly at Kama standing center stage. "No," I said. "I made the girl believe she could wear it." Gasps. Then applause. Again. Deeper this time, more than politeness. Zinnia had slipped out a side door before the lights came up again. No curtain call, no final bow, but Kama had hers, and this time it wasn't shadowed by anyone else's name. 1,000 characters. Backstage, she found me again, her face soft now, the tension gone. We sat side by side on the edge of the risers, our legs swinging like we'd slipped back in time to when she was 7 and thought I was magic. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked at her, then forward at the empty stage. We closed the wound, I said. Now let it scar in peace. She nodded, her head against my shoulder. I felt her heartbeat settle. Mine, too. We stayed there a long while, not waiting for anyone to come find us, not needing to. Because healing isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like a dress rustling as a child takes a final bow. A week after the showcase, Zinnia's name appeared in the local school bulletin, not in a spotlight or printed on a certificate, but in a quiet footnote beneath the event summary. Zinnia Carmichael has stepped back from her role with the Parent Arts Committee. No explanation, no apology, just absence. The moms who once rallied around her started whispering sideways, unsure of how to navigate the fallout. Some defended her. It was just stress. Others turned quick and silent, as if they'd never known her. Lucan hadn't called. Not a word. But I didn't hold my breath. I had finally stopped holding anything for him, especially the weight of my own expectation. Let the silence speak. Let it stretch as far as it needed. It had taken me too long to realize that silence isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's just peace reclaiming its corner. 100 characters. Moira and I met at the neighborhood cafe on the corner where we used to run into school moms and field trip committees. This time, the table was ours. A parent I recognized from years back gave a soft nod across the room, acknowledging, not pitying. That mattered more than it should have. Moira handed me my tea, her usual no sugar, no lecture grace still intact. You didn't just make a dress, she said after a sip. You made space for truth. Not everyone knows how. I didn't answer right away. I just let the words settle in. I thought of all the times I tried to explain myself, to be louder or nicer or more strategic. Turns out, sometimes you don't need a better defense. You just need to stand where people can see and stay standing. 100 characters. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Lucan and Zinnia's house. No knocking, no announcement. Just Kama, waiting outside on the porch with her backpack and a book in her hand. Dad had to work, she said, and Mom didn't want to come to the door. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. When we got to my house, Kama ran up to her room. I followed her, half expecting the usual clutter, half dreading another silent wall between us. But when I stepped inside, I stopped. There, on the wall, across from her bed, hung the midnight blue dress, pressed, framed, lit softly by the afternoon sun through her window. A plaque underneath it read, "The night I learned I belong." Kama turned, didn't say a word, just walked over and hugged me like I was gravity, and she had floated too long. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a backup. I felt like home. 1,100 characters. That evening, I sat at my writing desk and pulled out the half-filled journal, the one with pages torn and recovered, lined with the moments I didn't want to forget. I opened a blank sheet and began a letter. Not a letter to win him back, not one begging for recognition, just a message to my son, folded in the language of a mother who had run out of ways to explain her worth. I wrote the truth about Zinnia, about Kama, about how I'd chosen not to burn the house down when I knew I could. I didn't sign it with love. I signed it with honesty. Then I folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it beside the torn journal pages. Not everything needs to be said aloud. Some truths aren't for confrontation, they're just for remembering. 1,000 characters. As dusk settled, I left the house for a short walk. The street was quiet. A breeze nudged the branches above me. A little girl, maybe 8, danced in a driveway 2 houses down, wearing a too big leotard and pink socks. She waved when she saw me. I waved back, and I smiled, not because I saw a comma in her, but because I saw possibility, the kind that never leaves, even when you've been convinced it has. When I got home, I went to the hallway closet and pulled out my sewing box. I didn't need to fix anything anymore. Not a dress, not a child, not even myself. But I opened it anyway, not to mend, to begin. Because even after the final bow, some stories keep sewing themselves forward, stitch by stitch, memory by memory. Looking back, I've come to understand something I wish I'd known sooner. Being a mother isn't defined by what people call you. It's defined by what you do when no one's watching, by how you show up, even when you're pushed aside. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is remain still and wait for the moment to speak truth that can't be ignored. Maybe you've been there too, sidelined, silenced, made to feel like you didn't belong in your own family. But if this story reached you, let it remind you. Presence matters. Persistence matters. Quiet strength is still strength. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own story? Drop a comment below, even if it's just a 1, to let me know you felt something. Or tell me where you're watching from. And if this video touched your heart, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next story that might speak to yours.